Tonight, the life and confessions of a paedophile serial killer.
I'm a beast, I admit it. I'm an animal. I will screw any little girl. I don't give a damn who she is and whose daughter she is.
He has murdered 3 children and wrecked the lives of at least half a dozen families.
He has told us that if he was released, that he would kill. He would kill again. So that man is a danger and always will remain a danger. He is every parent's nightmare.
A predator who escaped justice for 30 years after clues were missed in a violent double murder.
How would you entice the child into Carlin?
Excuse me, little miss. Don't I know you? Don't think so. What's your name? Barbara, Mary, Carol, Susan, whatever. Oh, you're so-and-so's little girl, I know you. Do you want a lift? I'll give you a lift. Oh, yes, please. Oh, as we're driving away, do you want some sweets? Oh, yes, please. So you go in the shop and you're with her and let her pick her own sweeties. Yeah. Come out, she's already been paid.
Right, payment in advance, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, payment in advance.
Right.
In March 1970, the search for 2 of his victims sparked a massive police hunt in Enfield, North London. 2 children were snatched off the street in broad daylight and simply vanished. The bodies of Susan Blatchford, aged 11, and Gary Hanlon, aged 12, were discovered in a copse near their home 11 weeks later. Fleet Street called the 2 school friends the Babes in the Wood. It's taken 30 years to finally solve the mystery surrounding their murders.
Susan came round and knocked, and she said, "Is Gary there?" I said, "Yeah." And Gary went out and talked to her outside. And he had his football under his arm, and I said, "You're not allowed to go down the road." So he said, "All right then, Mum." I said, "Your dinner will be ready soon." And I looked out the door and he was gone. They were both gone. That's the last time I saw him. I went out, I looked down the road, but he'd gone. He'd completely gone.
In charge of the case was Chief Inspector Leonard Nipper Reid, Scotland Yard's top criminal investigator. It was Nipper's first case following the jailing of London gangsters Ronnie and Reggie Cray. In a career spanning 40 years, the Babes in the Wood investigation was the only murder inquiry to defeat him.
It was the 31st of March, it was 1970, and it was my birthday. And so every year since, I've remembered only too clearly the day that these 2 children just disappeared from the face of the earth. These were 2 very young children, and so right from the beginning, I attacked this as a major inquiry. I saw the parents, of course, at an early stage, and soon formed a very sympathetic and emotional relationship with them, really, in fact, more than I should have done.
Just for those few years I had Susan, to me that is why she's my unforgettable girl, a special baby. When she was born, she had the cord round her neck 3 or 4 times. I believe that that baby in heaven chooses to come to you. And she chose me, knowing what was going to happen to her eventually.
Within 3 weeks of Gary and Susan's disappearance, the police had followed up more than 200 sightings of the pair. some of them hoaxes, all to no avail. The mothers of the missing children appealed for help from the public.
I think they're either being held prisoner or they're trapped somewhere.
I think
I know
so.
my boy would come home if he could.
It's the
I
same
know
as
he would.
Susan. There's someone that they knew and trusted that knows something.
Please send them home.
It was thought at the beginning maybe they ran away together, but I discounted that very early on because they didn't really know each other. We caused roadblocks to be set up. When that proved uneventful, we extended the search to cover the whole of the country. We employed divers to search the rivers and the canals. There were reservoirs, these great enormous King George and the William Girling reservoirs. Trains that had gone through, barges that had gone through, were all traced and searched in case the children had got on board and then couldn't get off for one reason or another. Then we employed a helicopter because it was found that you couldn't do a real tracking of some of the open land and some of the reservoirs. And we could do that with the helicopter. And we searched 4,317 houses, an enormous proportion of the number of houses that were in the area. All the garages, all the sheds, the outhouses, things of that kind that they may have gone into and then found that they couldn't get out. And so it became an enormous inquiry.
Your attention please. This is an official police broadcast. 4 weeks ago today, 2 young children went missing from their home.
There were now 600 police officers hunting for Gary and Susan. Half of London's police dogs were scouring 5,000 acres of local woodland, and over 14,000 people, some of them sex offenders, had been questioned. An air of desperation set in.
These children just didn't disappear off the face of the earth. They must have gone somewhere, and in this area, in my experience, it's the most difficult case, simply because of the lack of information from the very beginning of the inquiry.
As the case proceeded, it became more disquieting to find that nobody had seen them. They'd just been spirited away. We'd got virtually nothing. We were no further forward. So there was a great deal of pressure. Senior officers at the yard and that kind of thing who felt that something must result from this enormous investigation.
For the mothers, there was only the agony of waiting, sleeping in armchairs, fearful of missing a knock on the door. And everywhere, the treasured school photo stares back from beneath that dreadful word, missing.
I couldn't believe any of this was going on because I went everywhere with my children. I went football, fishing, swimming, carol singing. I couldn't believe that somebody would ever be able to get hold of one of my children, you know. I can't cope with it, still can't cope with it. It's like yesterday to me. Still when there's a knock at my door, I mean I know he's not coming back, but I still think it's going to be him, you know. Or when my phone rings and my heart misses a beat, I think, oh, it's him.
78 days after they disappeared, Gary and Susan were found dead in a hide in a copse less than 2 miles from Gary's home. The bodies were badly decomposed, suggesting the children died very soon after they went missing.
They were found by a private individual who was out with his dog.
Just how close were they together? There's one report that they were almost in each other's arms.
They were close together.
Susan had got her arm around Gary's body. They looked as though they were cuddling up for warmth, and the newspapers immediately caught on with this and said that they died of hypothermia, and they tagged the case as the Babes in the Wood case. And this was a bit unfortunate, really, as far as I was concerned, because it simplified the whole situation, and rather than look at it as it was.
Whatever the press speculation, Nipper had a more pressing question. How had the bodies in the copse been missed?
I wanted to know exactly who had searched it, and I found that it had been searched on the 9th of April by 3 officers with their dogs.
That was just 10 days after the children had disappeared. The forensic evidence lost was a disaster, and Nipper summoned the dog handlers to get some answers.
Because this copse was so wildly overgrown, they couldn't walk the dogs through as they normally did on the lead, so they let them free range. So the dogs ran in there, and eventually they came out the other side when they were called by their handlers. But my concern was that they didn't find the bodies. And, you know, one of the questions that I posed was, what does your dog do when he finds a human body like that? And one of them said, well, I don't know. And the other one said, well, I think it might just sit there.
As a result of this blunder, new dog training techniques were introduced. But it was a mistake that helped a child killer to escape justice for 30 years and kill again. This is the copse where the bodies of Gary and Susan were found in a hide. It's been 32 years since Nipper Read last climbed this hill. Back then, the press said the children died of the cold, but Nipper was in no mood to jump to conclusions.
I knew that they were my children. They were found late at night, and there was nothing that could be done at that time. And so I came up early the next morning. We'd had to mark the path through because it was so extensively overgrown. The bodies were found more or less over the other side of the copse, but this was always the way that we went in. It was so overgrown that, you know, one couldn't walk upright. It was almost impossible for the sunlight to penetrate. It was like a very sinister kind of place. When I found the hides and saw the state of the bodies, and it was really very, very depressing.
Even though he had never heard the word paedophile, Nipper was convinced he was looking at a murder scene. Today, there would be no shortage of expert advice to support his instincts. The preparation of the hide as a killing field, the posing of the bodies in an embrace, even the choice of victim is a clue.
The most violent offender is the person who takes a stranger, because the victim can turn sort of violent, they can scream. Now, faced with a very dynamic situation like that, they will be more concerned with the control of the victim because they will want to extend the time with the victim. So it's in those particular cases you will find that they will use outbuildings, garages, hides, areas which are isolated, which they know they have full control of the victim, and they know that the victim knows they've got full control of them. And what we also see with this type of offender is that even though they've got access to somebody that they know within a family, they know that that victim would not accept that level of behaviour against them. So they will go outside to offend against a stranger.
Nipper Read believes Susan and Gary had been snatched off the street and murdered. But the bodies had been attacked by animals and were so badly decomposed it was impossible to establish a cause of death, let alone whether they had been sexually assaulted or strangled.
As far as I was concerned, these 2 children had been murdered. It never attracted me, the thought that they just cuddled up in this little hide and went to sleep and died of hypothermia. They would have wanted to go home, they would have seen the lights which were a direction for them, and they would have gone off and gone home. They were never babes in the wood, these 2 children. They were 2 victims. But of course I couldn't prove that because there was no physical evidence.
I just knew they didn't go up there and die. I mean, what 2 children would go up and lay in a copse for days on end, hungry, starving, frightened of the dark? You knew damn well it wasn't right.
There might not be a cause of death, but Susan's clothes told a story that reinforced a mother's instinct.
We found that Susan's underwear, briefs and tights were missing, and a brassiere was missing. We now know that paedophiles take these things away as trophies because they get some sort of satisfaction from that. But this was ridiculed by the senior detectives at the yard, who thought that I was straying into an area that I couldn't prove.
At the inquest, an open verdict was recorded. The missing underwear was explained as the work of animals, even though Susan was found still wearing her overcoat.
She always used to wear one pair of tights, a pair of pants, and another pair of tights on top of that. So where were all those gone? At the inquest, they said it must have been an animal, so I said, yes, the only animal must have been a man.
Nipper Read ordered an experiment based on the post-mortem pictures of the trousers Susan had been wearing. He hoped the results would convince Scotland Yard there was a child killer on the loose.
Susan's trousers were found over the bodies, and the trousers were what I called kippered, torn in such a fashion that they became one piece. Now, all the people at the yard said that this was the result of animals. I couldn't accept that, and I didn't accept that. And so I got 12 pairs of these trousers. I got the biggest, strongest guys in the squad to try to tear them manually. They couldn't do it. But I found that if I put these on a young, slim detective, I found that then by grasping them at the crotch and the waist and pulling them sharply, this combined with his weight pulling the other way, tore them exactly as these trousers were in fact torn. And that's what I think had happened.
You think really what those two children must have felt, and this is something I shall never forget, is that when she died, there was nobody there to help her, which is something that we all can have. But those two children had nobody to hold their hand when they died.
Nipper Read made one final attempt to classify the case as murder, despite the lack of hard evidence. But he felt he was up against the politics of policing, a reluctance at the yard to have the clear-up rate spoiled by two unsolved murders.
Eventually we had a big conference at Scotland Yard, and the pathologist said that the children were in such a way in their embrace that you couldn't introduce a third party. The senior detective officers from the yard didn't argue that case at all. They said this couldn't be a murder because you couldn't prove a cause of death. And that being the case, they were satisfied to say, well, we can write that one off and leave it at that.
It was all forgotten when the papers couldn't keep it in, and Mr. Read tried desperately, but they weren't allowed any more money to keep the case going. It was like we was forgotten. Once it was over and the children were found and they were buried, it seemed like that's an end to it.
The Babes in the Wood never became a murder inquiry, and without that protection, all the physical evidence was destroyed. The Hanlon and Blatchford families have spent the last 30 years gently insisting to the many who recall the case that their children did not die of the cold.
When I did my final report, I said very emphatically that I was satisfied that it was murder, but it's most unlikely that it will ever be resolved. I didn't know that 30 years later somebody was going to come forward and confess.
In May 1996, a call from the top security wing of Wakefield Prison was patched through to the Met's major investigation squad for North East London. The call came from 58-year-old Ronald Jebson, who was serving a life sentence. He said he had new information regarding the Babes in the Wood case.
Jebson was a convicted murderer. He had been convicted in 1974 of murdering an 8-year-old child. Prior to that, he had served prison sentences for buggery, indecent assault on a 6-year-old child, and also another indecent assault on a 4-year-old child back in the mid-50s.
Declan's team spent the next 2.5 years investigating Jebson's sex crimes. He described himself as a monster, fashioned from his own sufferings of child abuse. But as the police soon discovered, Jebson and the truth had long since parted company.
What we hoped for was a fairly simple, open and shut case, that this man Jebson was actually going to tell us that he had killed these 2 children, Susan and Gary. But what he told us was that 2 other people were actually responsible for the deaths of these 2 children. And he named those people as Robert Papper and Maureen Papper, implicating both of those parents in a double murder.
But there was a bitter twist to Jebson's allegation. He was in jail for the murder of the Pappers' 8-year-old daughter, Rosemary. The police began to suspect that Jebson's real motive in talking to them was a twisted desire for revenge.
What is it you want to get off your conscience, Ron?
I know they were murdered by Bob and Maureen in my car. Raped and buggered, taken out and dumped.
You are making, well, the most serious allegations you can make against someone.
Of course.
Not, you know, child murders against the parents of your victim.
True.
Why wait 22 years before you call us?
I'll tell you why. You ain't gonna believe it.
Try me.
Neither of you will believe it.
Well, try us.
Right, I will try. I have got a conscience.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people ain't out there. And I keep thinking, what an evil bastard I am, and what evil bastards are still out there walking the streets.
No one more than this man knows just how evil Jebson was. He grew up with him, and Jebson murdered his daughter. There was no easy way for the police to deal with the allegation that Robert Papper had killed the Babes in the Wood, even though it came from the man who murdered his daughter. Robert was DNA tested and questioned under caution. Then he learnt the name of his accuser.
Jebson killed my daughter, destroyed my first marriage, destroyed my second marriage, accused me of murder of the Babes in the Wood. He couldn't make that stick. So then he decided he was going to make allegations about me interfering with my other 2 daughters. His allegations were fragments of his imagination. I mean, for me, what he's done to my life, you can't put words to.
When the Babes in the Wood disappeared, Jebson was lodging with the Pappers and their 6 children. Robert's first wife, family and long-lost neighbours were all quizzed by the police to see if there was any truth in Jebson's accusation of child abuse and murder.
No one supported anything that he had actually said at all. It just gave the whole lie to what this evil man had constructed in his own mind, and for probably his own gratification as well.
Jebson was an adopted child and a classic loner. He was twice rejected by the army and claimed to work as a chauffeur. On the afternoon the Babes in the Wood vanished, he was at the job centre in Enfield. His alibi was checked at the time and accepted by the police.
There was nothing in my inquiry that connected Jebson in any possible way at all. Nobody had seen him putting them into a motor car or inviting them into it or speaking to them in the road or anything of that kind. The children just disappeared. The word paedophile was something that I'd never heard of, and it wasn't a common word at that time, nor was the fact that there were people like that were predators that preyed upon young children.
4 days after Gary and Susan disappeared, Jebson was arrested for indecently assaulting an 11-year-old boy in woods near Nottingham. He was again questioned about the Enfield killings, but denied any involvement. He was jailed for 5 years, but released after 3, and went back to lodge with the Pappers. For a second time, Jebson kept secret from the family that he'd been in jail for indecent assault on a child. And once again, Jebson went to live in the Pappers' Hatfield home.
She seemed a bit more shifty. You know, he didn't want to sort of associate with anybody, he just wanted to stay on his own. We thought he was a queer, actually, because he was never with women, and he'd never go with women, you know. And Maureen at the time, that was my first wife. She says, I don't like him. There's something about him I just don't like. I said, well, you know, I went to school with a guy, I said, put a bit of trust in him, I suppose. And he still bought sweets for the children and whatever. Tried to get very close to Rosemary. And I think that's when Maureen said he's got to go. We've had a few choice words from him. He said, I'll get even with you anyway. Rosemary went missing. I went into the classroom and I said, where's Rosemary, right? And they said, oh, she's been picked up. I said, by whom? She said, by Uncle Ron. I said, she ain't got a bloody Uncle Ron.
Could have been any other little girl from that school. And who comes out of the alleyway? Little Rosemary. Hello, Uncle Ronnie. You want a ride? Oh, yes, please. And we're driving away. I put my hand in her lap. No, you mustn't. She edged away, so I pulled her to us. I said, get her off, I'm going to hurt you.
You're going to what?
Hurt her. Because I'm oversexed, and I'm wanting it bad. And I'm not going to give a damn how I get it.
Jebson bought 8-year-old Rosemary Papper a bag of sweets, and then took her to a birdwatcher's hide in woods near Welland, where he raped and strangled her.
I says to her, Scrib, I don't want you. I said, Scrib, I've got undressed. She said, right, lie down. No. And she rolls on her belly. I tried to turn her over. She won't do, so I'll give her a couple of slaps. Still won't move. I said, right, now you're going to have it. She screamed, she cried. I slapped her. Didn't like it. After I spent myself, I sat up and she turned red and looked over her shoulder. And by then I was slank.
No, you blame her for that? Then?
Yeah, I'm blaming her for it. I said, now look what you've done.
This is the moment when psychologists say abuse escalates to murder. The fantasy fails, the abuser's sexual inadequacies are exposed, and a lifetime's hurt finds sudden and violent expression against a defenseless child.
The most serious offenders who do go on to kill, they work through what I call a type of script. So they will get the child in a position of control, and he will expect the child to participate. But then it will come to a critical point, and then if that child doesn't acquiesce to the sexual behaviour, the offender can turn very violent.
I forced her down, but this time I made sure she is on her back. She didn't want it, but I held her down. And the next thing I know, my hands around her neck with a cord, and I'm strangling her.
Whilst the intercourse is taking place, that's when you're strangling her?
Yeah.
Was that part of the enjoyment, Ron?
I don't know.
Be honest.
It might, as I said, I was inside her, and I'm oversexed, but I'm not getting satisfaction.
Right.
I want more than satisfaction, but I ain't getting it.
What is the satisfaction you're looking for?
I don't know.
Even now?
Even though I still don't know what satisfaction I was looking for.
Right.
But I'm not getting pleasure. I'm just using her as a waste bin. I'm carrying her into the corner of the field, which was a dumping ground though for rubbish.
Yeah.
And covered her up with straw.
Rosemary's parents hoped to see their daughter a grown woman by now, with children of her own.
I'd lay in bed some nights and I'd think of what he'd done to a girl of mine. I mean, once you lose a daughter, you lose a part of you. To be honest with you, I don't think anybody saw that capability from that guy. To sexually assault him, yes. But to go any further than that, then I don't think anybody saw that side of him. Yeah. She was a great little kid. Very outgoing, happy. This is where Jebson got his advantage, right?
We'd interviewed numbers of people for murder. We'd never had anybody who'd been so explicit and who was obviously out to shock and make us complicit in his world, and to see whether we got some pleasure, perversely, out of what he was telling us. I felt he was a truly evil person.
A criminal psychologist was advising the police interrogators. He said Jebson would only confess if they unravelled his world of fantasy and lies.
Something that ran throughout the interviews with Jebson was a juxtaposition of reality and fantasy in his world, where names and places and times would become changed. In other words, he edited out in his own mind anything that would have caused him pain. It's a way in which he actually can distance himself from responsibility, from feelings of guilt, and it may be how he deals with the horror of the murders.
The clearest example of this was a recurring dream that Jebson had fashioned during 25 years in prison.
I'm on a swing, and little Nicola is laughing and clapping. Stop. And I land right smack bang beside Nicola, who's like a precious china doll to look at. Blonde hair to a little bump, slim. Put my arm round her. I said, "You want to come?" "No," she says. "Yes, you do." And then the next thing I know, we're walking down this lovely floral path, as if hovering on a cloud. And we come to this lovely house, the House of Paradise.
What house, Ron?
The House of Paradise.
What? Lost me. Well, where is the House of Paradise? No, I don't mean...
Could you explain to this gentleman about the House of Paradise?
It's the perfect house because you've got the perfect child in the perfect location.
Yeah. Paradise.
Got it.
And we go in. We have a laugh and joke. And then it's bedtime. And then we go upstairs to bed. And we perform in the bedroom. Everything. No problems at all.
Does force ever enter the dream?
Never at all.
So it's all the child in the dream.
Oh, it's all willing all the way down the line.
Always a willing partner.
And then the face just blows up as if an explosion's happened. And all I'm seeing is stars. And then blackness. And it was the same dream in time after time after time.
Was there a face to that girl?
Yes.
And who was that?
Rosemary.
Rosemary. Right.
By now, detectives believed Jebson's fantasies were cover stories for other unreported attacks. Michaela Odwell had stayed silent for 25 years prior to the investigation. She'd been Rosemary Papper's best friend at school. Aged 8, She saw Jebson the night Rosemary was murdered.
He said his car had broken down in Hertford, and could he stay the night? He had this white jumper on, and it had a blood mark round here. And he said he'd cut his finger. We didn't realise then he'd murdered Rosemary.
The next day, Michaela's sisters went to school, but she had a cold and stayed home in bed.
I heard the stairs creak, and he stood in the doorway. He says to me, "Do you want to play a game?" I said, "What kind of game?" Before I could do anything, he had pinned me to the bed. It seemed like it was going on forever. I'm screaming for help. He just basically was enjoying it. His eyes were bulging. He was smiling as well. And he said, "Every woman and every child knows what they've got between their legs, and they know what it's for, and you're going to enjoy this." We heard the back door go. So my mother, she'd come in. And he put 10p in my pocket. So if I ever tell what's happened to me, he would kill me. He's killed once, and he will kill again. And he told me he'd kill Rosemary. And I'll never forget that, because I was so shocked. And I've come to realise over the years, I would have been his next victim.
Jebson was arrested for Rosemary's murder just hours later. That dreadful day is long gone, but its legacy remains.
I was a very slim child, very pretty, until that day. And I piled on the pounds so no one could get close to me again. I've had relationships, but they've only lasted 3 or 4 months because I wouldn't sleep with any of them. I couldn't stand my back or my backside being touched because he did that. I don't think I'll ever have children. And I don't think I'll ever be married either, because I just can't trust anyone. And he's taken all that away from me, and that's something I can never forgive.
After the break, how police finally solved the 30-year mystery of who killed the babes in the wood. The challenge now for detectives was finding new ways to get Jebson to talk afresh about the murders of Gary Hanlon and Susan Blatchford, the babes in the wood. But their interrogation rested on a knife edge.
I believe that you were more involved than you telling us. I want you to be honest with us, Ron.
I've been honest all the way down the line.
I'm not.
But if you're going to try and drag me in...
Ron, listen to me.
No,
I'm not
no, let me finish.
Okay.
If you're going to try and drag me in on this double murder, I will terminate the interview and fuck off back to Wakefield and then let you dig your own cases out.
Ron, what do you mean drag you into something?
I'm simply asking you to be honest with us.
I am being honest.
Well, okay, I'm not called you a liar, am I?
No, but you're good as.
I'm not called you a liar.
No, fuck it.
Ron, don't get heavy-handed.
4:26. Stopping the tape.
How could the detectives get under Jebson's guard? The breakthrough finally came when they showed interest in a recurring feature of his crimes, something that harked back to his childhood days.
We looked at the issue of hides, shelters, and this played a great part in Jebson's vision, his fantasy. He was given his head, so to speak, and he talked about hides.
You walk into a wood, you're going to build a hide, educate you, Ron. Educate
Right.
me.
Willow.
Yeah.
Nice willow branches.
Yeah.
And you tie them down to the ground, so you make an arch.
Right.
So you bring one this way, and you'll bring one that way.
Yeah.
So you've got a circle of 8.
When you're in the hide, yeah, are you the little boy again?
I'm that little boy again. Little Ron Jebson lives in safety, paradise. Nobody can get at him.
Let's draw a little bit of a separation here. Who am I talking to?
Now you're talking to Big Ron.
Right.
But Little Ron, is always in the background.
It hit us totally by surprise that you had two competing forces, two elements, two personalities within Ronald Jebson, Jekyll and Hyde. And when one overrode the other, then that led to murder.
This new insight into Jebson's personality seemed to explain why he had been so difficult to pin down. It was decided to make one final push for a confession to the Babes in the Wood murders.
I think we're communicating for the first time.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? Do you feel that?
Yeah.
Right. We've been talking about children.
Yeah.
Who have I been talking to?
Little Ron.
So it's Little Ron that's doing the children, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Enfield kids have got Little Ron's hallmarks all over them.
Still ain't Little Ron.
I don't want Big Ron to interfere with Little Ron here. Okay? Come on.
The old bank was fucking about with the two Enfield kids.
Little Ron did it?
Yeah.
It's Little Ron when they tell me the truth.
Little Ron is telling you the truth.
We're close, Ron.
I know we're close, but as I said, as Big Ron said, he had nothing to do with him.
Did Little Ron have anything to do with him?
Little Ron didn't have nothing to do with him either.
If I said to you that people think that Little Ron did, would you be upset with me?
Yes, I would. Very upset.
Let me tell you what I see when I'm with you. Let me tell you. I see that little boy that someone has brutalised and using your words has turned into a monster.
Yeah.
You hear me? You understand?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be really sincere when I'm talking to you. And I want to talk to Little Ron again.
Little Ron doesn't want to talk.
Don't want to talk anymore?
It was around two personalities within Ronald Jebson that his fantasies were built. To take two children off the streets to something that he had prepared and fulfill his fantasy. Sexual gratification, the deaths, the killing, the control over two young children, and the horror that he was causing, that was important to him.
2.5 years into the investigation, there was still no result. In August 1998, the case was being wound down when Jebson called from prison. He said he wanted to confess to killing Gary Hanlon and Susan Blatchford. Declan Donnelly took him back to the copse, where the Babes in the Wood had been found. His confession was recorded on audio tape.
I came up here, and I parked the car. We've got to walk down a bit.
I saw this open gateway. We went across these fields and stopped at a copse. Inside the copse, my aggressive nature started showing. Susan didn't want to play, nor did Gary. Gary sat there not knowing what to do, as I had Susan's jeans down and unders. I was sitting on the stomach. Didn't give a damn. Thought middle of nowhere, no one can hear the screams, no one can hear anything. After I finished with Susan, Gary said he wants to go home. I said, you're going nowhere. And he went for me, so I used him. I then raped him. I stayed there, having me fun with them both, until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. They were both dead. I put them close together, maybe a foot between them, and left. I was a bad evil Ron that night.
While we were walking to the copse, Jebson was tense, was nervous, and when I finally asked him to enter the woods, he wouldn't do it.
I'm not entering the woods again.
You're not? Are you?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I am.
Why are you superstitious, Rob?
Always happy.
What of?
Spirits.
Yeah. You're afraid there might be ghosts there? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Whose ghosts?
I'm going in there. Gary and Susan's. No way am I going in there. I wouldn't even go on the field where I buried Rosemary. Okay.
His greatest fear was the ghosts of those two children. And that is where we concluded the interview.
For the families, there was yet more to endure. Susan Blatchford's body was exhumed for forensic tests. Photographic evidence then confirmed the crush injuries to her stomach that Jebson described inflicting. It was a telling detail only the murderer could have known.
You've got to go through it to really understand how really wicked he was to two children. And all he's got is back in his own cell. Well, I don't know, dear. I don't know how he slept all them years.
In May 2000, 30 years after the event, Ronald Jebson pleaded guilty to the double murder at the Old Bailey. He was given 2 further life sentences. Jebson undoubtedly enjoyed his game with the police, but many felt his confession contained a final, heartless twist.
This was something that would enhance his reputation. Confessing to 2 more murders. I'd done another 2. And he wanted his esteem to be gratified amongst his fellow paedophiles.
I don't think there was any remorse there, but I'm pleased for the family. I'm pleased after 30 years that Beryl and Muriel have seen some justice.
Relatives from both families attended the trial, looking for some final sense of closure. But the truth in all its detail brought new anguish.
Gary tried to defend the girl, and he knocked him out. Then he had sex with him and strangled him while he was having sex with him. That was it. His sort of thing, you know, what he done. That's what he did to children. For me, it's been worse since I actually knew. I knew he'd been murdered, but I couldn't cope with knowing he'd been touched by somebody.
Ronald Jebson will spend the rest of his days behind bars. On average, 8 children a year die at the hands of predators such as Jebson.
Paedophiles will block out anything that they don't want to remember. That's the only way they can then live with what they've done. But it also seems very tragic that the authorities tried to suggest all the time that this wasn't murder. So the lesson to learn here is that in cases of this kind, we should never let the trail go cold.
Nipper Reeve came up to the Old Bailey when we went, and he kissed me on the side of the face and he said, "We was right, wasn't we, Beryl?" I said, "Yeah."
If you've been disturbed by or relate to the issues in this programme and would like to talk to someone, call our confidential helpline on 0800 328 5678. Lines are open till 2 a.m.